All right, so we're gonna get going since it's 10:30. This is gonna be a lot of riveting information for everybody. Thanks for coming to this class. I know there's a lot of other cool things going on. Who came voluntarily? Oh, that's good at least. I figured it was gonna be some of the Coles guys like, oh, I had to be here, damn it. He's gotta be here. So yeah, I appreciate everybody for coming, and you know, it's like I was telling Joe down here, this is the first time I've given this class, and like I'm by no means an expert. I'm just like you guys, you know. The only big difference for me is I just kind of got thrown into it at one point in my career, and I inherited a bunch. I had a good grant writer who was in Madison County when I was doing the DES stuff when I came in, and he was like, hey, here's like $4 million worth of grants that you need to manage. And I'm like, I've only managed like a Lowe's grant that was for like a laptop for $100, you know. And but yeah, he kind of threw me, you know, a FEMA grant, which was the town of Ennis, all the culvert replacements and bridge replacements in Ennis for a flood mitigation project, managing all that, which was like a, what was that, Sean, like $2.1 million project? I mean, it was huge.
2-3.
Yeah, it was a huge project, and so managing all of that grant and everything else. And so, you know, what this talk's going to be about is really that process of working through a grant and how to manage it. You know, I've really been working for the last 2 weeks, like trying to get a really good comprehensive list together. Like, so if people want to know, like, where do I find these grants at? And that list just got so long. I mean, it was when I started pulling like all the foundations in the state and between like AFG, FEMA stuff, fuels mitigation. I mean, it was 72 pages long. So what I'm going to do with that is maybe before I leave, we'll get everybody's email addresses. I know most of you guys in here, I think, but and when I get that list finally done, I'll send it out to everybody, because like I said, it's huge. Now it would take 4 hours to sit here to go through some of that stuff. So a little bit about me. This is the disclaimer. I'm not a grant writing expert. This process might be different with your, you know, like Gordy for a municipality, with having municipality people who are grant. You have grant managers at the city, I'm guessing, or procurement specialists, and all those different.
Kind of do our own, but
Do you?
there are some that are embedded in the city.
Yeah, so it's going to be different depending on your organization type. I use too many memes in this presentation because it's really boring. So, you know, I'm trying to spice it up a little bit. I get rejected more than I'm successful. I was telling these guys I got baseball average at best when it comes to grant writing. So 1 out of 4 maybe, 1 out of 3, depending on which ones we're going for. And I'm aware that some of these slides I put too much text in because there's a lot of information, so I apologize for that. But if there's those presentation critics out here, it is what it is. Like most firefighters, I don't not write real well. So, you know, like most of us, we're not, you know, literature, English professors in here. So I'm just here to show you, like, you can do this stuff if you're just a regular average dude. And I think that I am somewhat successful because I think outside the box when it comes to these things about how you can relate, you know, different projects to different grants and missions and things like that. I don't typically know when to quit, and I can communicate pretty well to people. So as you can see when I talk about I don't write real good, picture of me as a child, you know, going places, not really college, but, you know, somewhere. Just about me, you know, the important stuff. I'm married up. I strongly recommend. She's a physician assistant. She makes more than I do. She's better looking than me. Strongly recommend that. I have 2 girls, are 6 and 8. They're little hellions. One's a redhead, so wish me luck there. I have 4 Labrador retrievers. Some of you folks in the room know I have a really serious archery and waterfowl hunting problem. I reside in Twin Bridges, Montana. Yes, I drive to Big Sky. It's an hour and a half one way. I drive it 4 days a week. The drive's pretty miserable, mind-numbing. A lot of podcasts and books on tape. We have a little funny farm. We raise and hunt, or hunt and butcher almost all of our own meat. So, kind of something that we do. Takes a lot of time. My wife's really getting into that, but I keep telling her until you can make the salary you make now doing that. It's just a hobby. So, the work stuff that nobody really cares about. So 18 years total in emergency services. Kind of a roundabout career of starting in fire EMS as a firefighter paramedic, and then got away from it. Almost became a ranch hand for a while. I moved out here 12 years ago, and then got sucked back into being a DES coordinator and fire warden there in Madison County. and then got sucked into Big Sky Fire Department. Educating myself after the fact, so I was able to get an associate's back in the day, and then finally finished my bachelor's degree about 4 years ago, and then 1 semester from a master's degree at U of M here pretty quick. And was able to get my Chief Fire Officer designation from CPSE last year. Grant history, some of you guys know some of these ones. A lot of them are Madison County ones, so a couple guys in the room here have seen these before. There's a lot of stuff out there. You know, there's the FEMA ones, there's private, there's foundations that aren't specifically for fire, but they're just foundations that will give if you have a good cause. So, you know, we did a passport accountability system in Madison County, which was a Leary firefighter grant. I'm not going to go through all these, but a bunch of fuels mitigation grants, Montana Community Foundation, wildfire relief grants for Harrison Fire Department for a command rig. Yeah, just a bunch of random ones. So, I mean, like I said, I don't know when to quit. And so, you know, for the last, this is just since 2016, so this is the last 7 years. So just getting after and just going after them. You know, you never know if you don't try. So what we're going to talk about real quick is the objectives is just kind of demystifying the process. You know, it can be pretty intimidating, you know, to get into it. But once you get into it, and like you get your first one, it's pretty addictive. You're like, oh, this is cool. I can do this. We're just going to touch real quick on sources. Like I said, there's a lot of sources out there, and I'm just going to kind of go over top of like what are the big ones. You know, there's the federal ones, there's the nonprofits, there's the foundations, and then we'll kind of get into these are the pieces of the puzzle of the actual grant process after that. So I think this is a pretty good quote. There's no shortage of money out there. You guys have seen, like, every time you see something, it's like, oh, there's infrastructure money coming down right now. It's, I know it's $13 billion coming down the pipe right now for fuels mitigation and wildfire detection and all these things. So there's no shortage of money. You just got to be that person that's like, hey, I think I have a project that would fit into this. And you got to just take that plunge. So this is the process for grant writing up there. It can be that complicated if you want to try to make it that complicated, or you can just take the easy approach and just go through and just work through the process one step at a time, and anybody can do it. So again, like I said, a lot of text on some of these slides. I apologize for that. I'm not going to read it to you guys, but I'm just going to kind of go over that stuff up there is more for you guys to be able to look at. I think the process of the grant, the biggest thing is your organization ready to be able to apply for a grant? So do you guys have, you know, projects, do you have strategic plans in place, or do you have, you know, capital improvement things in place where you know a year, 2 years out that you need a certain item, and is that item going to fill a gap? And can you tell a story for that item of how it's going to help your community to be able to, you know, be eligible for a grant fund for that? Doing your research, big thing too now with everything is online anymore. So for federal grants and things like that, they have online application processes. And so like for the FEMA ones, you got to make sure that you got what used to be a DUNS number, and now it's a UEI number. They transitioned to that. Do you have a login to FEMA Go, which is where they do all the FEMA grants at, or grants.gov. So there's all these different applications out there that you need to have logins, credentials, or whatever else for that they're going to ask for. So then real quick into the sources, where to look. There's too many to list. I'll pull up. I've got 2 websites up right now on the back side of this. One of them is firegrants.com, and it's a funded through, I think it's funded through Firehouse or Fire Engineer, can't remember, but you know, it's a clearinghouse. They got a little list of all the different things. You can search by state, you can search by what you're looking for. I don't know if you have to be a member or not on that one. You can see certain ones, but I think there's like some membership things in there where when you go to like actually look at the notice of funding or whatever. But it's a good website just to kind of get that list to figure out what's out there, and then you can go, you know, to that third-party vendor or whoever's doing it and be able to look a little more at those grants. Private nonprofits, it's on the public one too. Don't just look at those FEMA ones, obviously, you know, that's the big one. There's the big 3, the AFG, the Fire Prevention and Safety, and SAFER grants. That's kind of the ones that everybody knows about. Everybody tries to get those because they're huge dollar amounts. You can get up to, you know, I think $1 million on a lot of those ones. But they're highly competitive. The good thing about those is they're peer reviewed. So like there's a group of firefighters out there who actually review those and rank those, which is kind of nice. You don't have like some of these other ones, you know, you've got a board of directors for the Gianforte Foundation or somebody, you know, who's reviewing these, and they're like, oh, this dumb firefighter, he can't even spell grant, and then, you know, you kind of get judged on some of that stuff. But the private side, I mean, there's a lot of them out there that are fire department specific. Has anybody done an FM Global fire prevention grant? Yeah, we did one of those in Madison County. We got iPads for all the fire departments from Madison County for inspecting, and that's what we said they were for. But you know, firehouse subs. Anybody got any firehouse subs? A lot of people do firehouse subs to get, you know, like swift water rescue equipment, extrication equipment, stuff like that. Those are fire department specific ones. Town pumps. Anybody want a town pump? Yeah. So a lot of you guys in this room have done a lot of these ones. Another one too, it's actually a public one, but it's in Montana, is the MDT ones. I think Chief Calnan, you guys did an ambulance, didn't you, on the MDT grant? I know I wrote one for Ruby Valley. That's a one for ambulances. Yep, there's another ambulance one there. There's a lot of stuff out there for us. You know, like I said, if you just think outside the box and can go and find them and write some sort of a legible grant, I mean, if you have the need, they're gonna see that, and they're gonna be willing to fund you guys. So one of the big things, the first thing you need to look for is that NOFO. It's called the NOFO. It's the Notice of Funding. So a Notice of Funding, typically when any grant comes out, they're going to put a NOFO out. It's going to be just kind of a quick summary of here's what the grant is, here's what's eligible for the grant, here's the cost breakout if it's, you know, 100% funding, if it's, you know, 75-25. It's going to tell you, you know, here's when applications open up, here's where the application process is going to lie. And so those NOFOs are really going to be kind of your early indicator of, hey, I think this might work out for us, and it's going to give you kind of an idea of how you need to, you know, formulate your grant for that. So I would say as soon as you get that, as soon as you find that, the very first thing you need to do is go through that really carefully and then research that. So if it's through a foundation or something like that, they got a website, go to that foundation, look through that website, try and figure out what's their mission, what's their vision, what have they funded in the past. You know, a lot of times on those things, you'll be able to pull past grants that they've funded and actually look through and read the old grants. And you can kind of get a pretty good feel of what they're looking for and what they funded in the past, just to kind of give you an idea of where to start with that. If you don't take anything away from this talk, this last point is probably the most important thing. Unless it specifically says, do not contact us, contact them. More times than not, if you contact them and you call them and you start talking to them and start establishing that rapport, you start telling them, hey, I got this project, you know, here's why I need to do this. They're going to help you out. And a lot of times they'll have you know, the administrators or the managers on staff, and they'll help you. They'll walk you through that grant. You know, a perfect example is right now we're working on a Western States Fuels grant right now. It's a hazard fuels mitigation grant. And so that goes through the state. Well, the state has 2 representatives at the state level that you send them the grant application, they read through it, make comments, send it back to you, you make edits, and then you go through that 2 different times. And so by the time it gets to the state level and they say, hey, we're going to include this in the packet from the state, it's already been gone through by like 4 or 5 people. And so they a lot of times have those resources there. The Leary Firefighter Foundation, same thing. I called them. I said, hey, you know, we want to do this. This is something we're lacking in accountability, you know, firefighter safety in Madison County. And they helped me out. They walked me right through that grant, put it together for me. I mean, I was pretty sure that when I submitted it that we were going to get funded for it because they, you know, essentially helped me put it together. So we're going to get into kind of the steps real quick here. So one of the biggest things right away, and this is the first thing that they're going to look at and see, is this problem statement. So what is the description of the problem that you have? I think of grant writing as like, does anybody, you know, have kids who are like doing science classes right now? They have to do the science fairs and things like that. And they got to come up with what, a hypothesis? So, you know, and they got to come up with a problem statement. So what's the problem? What's your hypothesis of what's going to happen if you fix this problem, or if you're going to fix the problem? And then what are your results and everything else? I kind of see it like that. So what's the problem? Your problem statement. Figure out what is the issue. And the big thing now is like, you know, you got to use hard numbers and data and things like that. They really want to see those things. And so if you're just going in with a generalized statement of, you know, we need a ladder truck because we have tall buildings, like that's not going to cut it anymore. You got to get into, you know, more data. I have 415 buildings that are over 4 stories, and I mean, you really got to get into the details on that stuff and be able to pull data. So, but all that stuff is available at your fingertips. So you've got census data. You know, you can actually look, you know, in your first dues and see, okay, this is the demographic makeup in this area. Look at your, you know, look at your response times. Pull actual response time data and get yourself a baseline that you're working with that shows them that, hey, we've got a problem. You know, so if you've got, say if you've got benchmarks of, you know, our response time is X, we're trying to get NFPA 1710 compliance, or, you know, our time to fire control is this, and we're trying to get a safer grant because we're trying to get an engine company of 3, we only have 2 right now. So just stuff like that. Like you got to get that data and be able to pull that data in and have a baseline benchmark of like this is where we're at right now, and it's a problem. And here's where we want to go with that. So as you get further into the grant, you're gonna see that here's the solution for this. Here's what we think is going to happen. There's that hypothesis, and then you're going to talk about, you know, your evaluation, metrics, and things like that. So just to kind of go through this real quick, who's affected? Get your demographics. In what ways are they affected? So this is where you need to have hard data. So I'll give you a quick example of. You know, for a fuels mitigation grant. So I think this last one we talked about, hey, we've done 278 wildfire risk assessments in our fire district. I can tell you that only 62% of those had 30 feet of defensible space around their homes. So, you know, I'm looking to get this defensible space grant so that I can provide these homeowners with X amount of dollar match to be able to do fuels mitigation on their property, because one of the big barriers is they said they just don't have enough money. Contractors are too expensive. So there, I have identified the problem. I want this money for this purpose right here. I've got a piece of data there where I can tell you, hey, you know, this is the amount of people that have defensible space. We're looking to turn this into 90% of these homes have defensible space. So there's, you know, what our metric is that we want to try to get to, and then you gotta have to get into your action plan of how you're planning on doing that. What's the urgency? You know, you have the burning buildings, babies dying, and all that stuff. Probably don't want to throw that in there, but you know, I mean, there's a sense of urgency for all of us in Montana. When you look at the rate of development and stuff like that, we're trying to keep up with buying equipment, building stations, and all these things. There's a sense of urgency because if we're behind the curve, there's no getting ahead anymore. So I see that as an urgency for all of us. And then, what have you done so far? So have you already started, like in the case that I just gave you? So we've already started going out and doing all these home risk assessments. We already have some fuels mitigation teams out doing fuels mitigation. So what have we done already? We can show them, hey, we as an organization are committed to this. Here's what we're already doing, but we just don't have the capacity to keep going at this rate. We need this to help us. Does anybody have any good examples of a project that you guys have in mind right now that you're kind of scoping for a grant? Anybody?
Well, yeah, I read a lot of grants. Like a trick that I've learned a little bit, I guess, when you're talking about grants and mitigation stuff is I've got the mitigation stuff figured out. So you could take state dollars, match them with federal dollars, and get that cost to zero for the landowners too. So matching funds is a good ticket.
Yep. Yeah, and we'll get into some matching fund stuff here in a little bit. But yeah, that's a commitment. That's a community commitment too. I mean, if you can already tell them, hey, I've got 45 landowners who already want to do this work. They're willing to contribute 30% of the cost out of this, and we as an organization are going to pay the overtime for the people to come in and do this and stuff. You're showing that commitment right there. So that photo, that's kind of, I see the problem statement. You've got all your stuff there, and you got to kind of fit it in the middle there to make all that complete. So the narrative, this is the part that kind of scares everybody. This is the big chunk where you kind of have to go into, hey, what are we doing? You know, who are we? What are we doing? What are we looking to solve? And the implementation plan. So I know from a lot of people who've done peer reviews on grants that if your problem statement sucks, they won't even read this part. Your problem statement sucks, they're done with it. They're over it because they're looking at so many of them. So then this is kind of the next thing. So you got to kind of think of this too. Of these are the steps. And so if this sucks, they're done with it. If this part sucks, they're done with it. If the next part sucks, they're done with it. And so you're being scored on all of these things. And so if you lose them on one of these things, then after the fact, you're out of it. So you kind of got to keep them engaged. And the hard thing now is a lot of these online ones, these online applications, they have character limits. So you got to figure out how not only to sell this, but you got to sell it in, 1,000 words or something like that. So that kind of makes it difficult at times, especially when they're asking for all these things. So kind of starting off, usually it's organizational background. That's usually a quick thing or the first thing that they're asking about. And that's can be as brief as, oh, this is our mission, this is our vision statement, these are our core values, we cover this many square miles, we're this many people, blah, blah, blah. I think the big thing with that is really getting into, like I said, when you do that research on the front end of trying to figure out, okay, what's this organization all about? And then try to kind of relate your organization, like, oh no, we kind of do, like this picture's funny, but at the same time it's true. It's like, okay, how can I kind of align the missions and what we're doing with what they're doing so that they can kind of buy into what I'm selling them? You're kind of a used car salesman when you're doing this stuff. You kind of got to think in that mindset of, I got to sell this a little bit. So you're going to describe all that basic information. And then the meat and potatoes is the program project description. So this needs to be really detailed. You need to get into, I'm going to do so like we're doing one for hiring seasonal fuels crew staffing. So I'm going to get into, okay, in May 1, we're going to bring on 4 fuels technicians, one crew boss, one they're going to spend 1 month of their time doing basic wildland firefighter training, S212, all these different classes. Project administration contracts will be lined up. They'll start getting to working on home ignition zone, egress, shaded fuel breaks on this date to this date. And then you got to be that specific with, and here's what we're doing. And so that's part of your implementation plan as well. Getting into here's how we're going to do it, here's how we're going to run it. Here's the dates and things like that. So it's got to be very, very detailed. But again, if there's character limits, then you got to sit there and try and figure that out, how to go back and cut out all the stuff the details that you want to tell them, and figure out what's important that I need to really relate here, and try to figure that out. Those character limits have been just a pain in my ass since I started doing that stuff, because like I get kind of in the weeds on those a little bit, and then I have to go back and reread, and then I like take a whole sentence out, and then I go back and take another sentence out. I'm like, no, I should put that sentence back in. That's pretty important, but yeah, it can be kind of a pain. So the narrative kind of continued here, that implementation plan. These are the questions that you should answer. Who will be in charge? What's going to be happening? Timeline for activities. Where are the activities going to take place? And just in your fire district? Is this going to be a regional thing? What is this going to be? And then how will the work be accomplished? And what are the resources needed to be able to get this job done? Obviously, if you're doing like an apparatus purchase or something like that, this is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be pretty easy to go through there and be like, oh yeah, we want to buy a ladder truck. You have to really sell of the why you need a ladder truck, but the actual implementation plan is pretty easy on this one, because it's like, we're going to put out the RFP or the RFQ, we're going to spec it, we're going to do all these things, and then we're going to buy it. Those ones are pretty easy. And I would say if you have any space left over, elaborate on why this approach is being selected, and then also if you can talk about, hey, this is another approach that we were thinking about, but here's why it won't work, or here's why this one would work, but it's not as good as this one. So if you have the amount of space to be able to do that, do that. Next biggest thing is just edit. Edit. The more eyes that you can get on it, the better. So don't go the day before a grant's due and just rip through it and submit it, as one person. Make sure that you take it, maybe give it 2 days, where you can write it and then maybe give it to somebody else to take a look at. I try to get it in front of at least 3 to 4 people, and then get it back to me, and then make some changes, and then get it back to at least another person to look at it after that, before I submit something. And pick those people carefully too. Pick somebody who, that person that every time you send an email, they're like, oh, you forgot a comma here, or like, those people that are kind of annoying. They're the ones who you want reviewing your grants. So I found that out a while ago, and so I know exactly who that person is in our organization, and I have them look at all the grants that I'm submitting. So yeah, because once you get into this area, if you start having incomplete sentences, misspelled words, and all these different things in there, depending on the grant, they're going to look at it and be like, they can't even, put a sentence together. So we're not going to let them manage $1 million of federal funding. So you need to kind of halfway sound intelligible with what you're trying to put together there. Getting into the fun piece here, the budget. Everybody loves the budget piece of it. That was a cool little video in between there where it goes and clicks on it, and then I go to the next one, but it didn't work very well. So that's one of those things to try to keep you entertained when you're listening to Grants 101. So budget. You got to create a realistic budget for this. It doesn't need to be super complex. You just need to go in and be like, hey, here's what we're looking for. Here's the total dollar amount. If there's personnel costs involved with that, if there's equipment costs in that, there's travel costs in that. Just have those broken out and just be clear on them. Don't underestimate too. I mean, if anything, overestimate. I always try to go for like 10% over of what I actually think it's going to be, just in case. Or at the very end, you can work in some contingency costs and things like that if you need to, or a contingency line. And then considerations is, one, use a project-based budgeting method. Has anybody ever done that before? It's kind of, you think about your regular budget as your regular budget. A project-based budget is just a budget based on a project. So just going through and creating your own budget for that deal there. And then match. We talked about match a little bit ago. I mean, match is, if you're a smaller organization or you're doing something like fuels mitigation, match is a huge deal. How much can you actually give to a homeowner? What constitutes for their match? Can you use volunteer time for match? Some of the fuels mitigation projects, you can take the wood that is coming off of that piece of property and you can use that as match. We had one, we donated to the wood bank. They donated to the wood bank, we were able to use that for match. We had another one that we were doing where we were doing some structural retrofits and we were doing non-combustible 0 to 5 feet around home retrofits for landscaping. And so some of them that were like, hey, I want to kind of do that, but I don't know. We would have to go back to FEMA and ask them because they weren't in the original scope. So what we allowed them to do is said, okay, well, you want to do fuels reduction, in your defensible space area, so they would do that. And then what we got FEMA to allow us to do is, okay, well, they went in and replaced their bark mulch with gravel around their house, so they spent 10 grand on that. So we were able to let them use that as their match. And then they were able to get the fuels reduction for the house completely, for the entirety of what the grant paid out for. So there's some really cool, inventive ways to use match. In the emergency management world, soft match, like if you have meetings and you have people volunteering to come to meetings, what's the volunteer rate right now, Joe? $28.54, $20.54 an hour for them to be at your meeting. And so that can be match. Match is just it's a really great thing. I should say soft match is a really good thing. Hard match is hard match. Hard match is cash. So like if you just literally have to be, we're going to pick up 10-20% of this grant. The other piece of the budget is how many years will this funding cover? So I've been thinking a lot lately about, I was at a conference not too long ago and some of the reps from Pierce were there. They're building engines right now for 2024, 25. And so like if you're sitting there trying to scope an AFG grant for a ladder truck that you're not going to be able to get until 2027, like, what does that look like? There's a lot of this supply chain stuff that's really going to kind of screw with some of this grant stuff, I think. I don't think a lot of people are kind of quite seeing it yet, but and you can't get a solid cost on that either. So it's going to be really interesting to see what that is, but see how that pans out.
Dustin, on that, have you seen any adjustments being made with the grant administrators for your period of performance? Are they extending those?
Yeah, some of them are. I mean, just they have typically when you see like the award packets and you'll have like there's some extenuating circumstances on there with like suppliers and things like that. So I have seen some of those where they're extending them out, those performance periods. Some of I think the equipment ones though are going to be the ones like the big ones like the AFGs and things like that are really going to be impacted by a lot of these supply shortages because nobody can get anything. SCBAs are almost a year out right now, I think. 8 months to a year, somewhere around there. Radios, I mean, shit, we're still waiting on a BK Mobile that we ordered 7 months ago. So I mean, there's just so many things that are so far behind. If you're trying to utilize grant funding for that, it's going to be really difficult to figure out how to write that grant. We're like, you know, hey, we want this, we want to buy it this next year, but we can't really pay for it because they're not going to deliver it until 3 years down the road. So, yeah, I'm not sure how it's going to shake out with a lot of that stuff. It's going to be interesting. But like fuels mitigation grants, you know, having those, you know, marched out for 2-3 years are really nice because you can create that budget plan. I think when you're creating that budget plan for multiple years, you need to consider too that with where we're at and what's happening and with cost of living increases and everything else, is you need to make sure that you've got that inflation rate in there as you build that grant along the way. So if you're using salary wage benefit, or if you're buying a piece of equipment but you're not going to be able to pay for it till next year, and you've scoped it this year but they're not able to lock the price in for you, make sure that you're accounting for that 4 to 8% for that next year. Otherwise it's going to be a shocker when you get to that point. You're like, hey, we're going to pay for it, we got the grant funds for it, and they're like, oh no, this price just went up, buddy. And you're like, and then you got to go to your chief or whoever and be like, hey, I need, you know, an extra 20 grand to be able to pay for this. I thought you said it was free. Nothing in life's free, chief. So yeah, budget forecasting for that, you know, and then just like I said, your standard line items, personnel, supplies, equipment, travel, matching funds. And then if you do FEMA, you know, any of the BRIC grant or pre-disaster mitigation, or no, PDM is BRIC, right? And hazard mitigation grant, and I can't remember all the other ones anymore, but you have to do this thing called a benefit cost analysis, which is really fun. It's a 4-day class that you can go to and sit on a computer, and it's kind of a waste of time, especially if you're doing fuels mitigation grants, because all they're looking at is your benefit cost ratio. So on a fuels mitigation grant, you know, if you can say, oh, I want $100,000 of fuels mitigation money, and I save one house, and one house is worth $1.2 million. Well, there you have a 10-to-1 benefit cost ratio. So it's an easy sell on those ones. But the whole reason they built that is for like flooding, and you know, when they're doing like the structural retros where they're lifting houses up and everything else. Just a little graphic to kind of show you kind of those basic direct costs to include in that budget. Like I said, personnel, travel, equipment, supplies. Make sure on your personnel piece of that, you know, that you're accurate on, you know, how many hours you're going to do. And then, like I said, make sure you're doing salary, wages, benefits, all those different things. That don't just do salary on those. And then the other thing too is, make sure that too that you have your match in there. So that match is always part of that budget. And then they want to know too, what is that match coming from? Is it soft match, hard match, whatever it is? So that needs to be in the budget as well. Excuse me. So evaluation, all these grants now, they're like, oh, what's your performance metrics? How are you going to evaluate this? You know, they're so into like these metrics and everything else. A lot of times it's super difficult to relate what is the performance metric. So we have resort tax in Big Sky. So we have to write every year for whatever, you know, we're asking for from resort tax. And usually we do like one smaller capital project that we ask for, and then they do operational support. So like this last year was SCBAs. So it's like, what do you put in there for a metric for an SCBA? We need new SCBAs because ours are no longer NFPA compliant. You know, but like, what do you put in there as a metric? Oh, well, if we don't have a firefighter injury, well, we haven't had one that I can benchmark and say that we've had an issue because of an SCBA. So like, how do you do that? You know, there's some of those ones that it's pretty difficult, but everybody's all gung-ho on, we need metrics. So some of those you gotta kind of get a little bit in the weeds to try to figure out how to make a metric on there. Some easy metrics that you can go for is, you know, we're gonna do this because, you know, my quantitative example there is safer grant, staffing increase, engine company to 3. What's my metric on that? I'm gonna have decreases in response time, decrease in water on fire time, fire patrol times, and I'm gonna have a decrease in fireground injuries because now we're operating with an engine company of 3 instead of 1 or 2. So in that case, yeah, I do have some metrics. That's where I go back to that first part. Was like, you got to have that baseline to start with in order to be able to say, well, here's what we're going to benchmark that we're going to look for, and that what this grant is going to improve, how we're going to improve with this grant. Qualitative example, a lot of people are using now, which is made really easy with like SurveyMonkey and all these different things that are out there now. It's just doing a community survey or an organizational survey, you know, where you can say, well, 82% of my fire district thinks I'm a dumbass. Well, I'm gonna get this grant, and hopefully only 60% of the people think I'm a dumbass. So it's a qualitative example that you can use. Your evaluation reveals minimal or negative impacts. This is where I was talking about, if you have the room, put in some of those contingency plans in there. So, you know, hey, this strategy A is not, if it doesn't work out, maybe we'll move to strategy B. You know, as long as it is identified in your grant and it's within that budget parameter, you can do that. So if you get to a certain point, you're like, hey, this really is not impacting our response times. Maybe we need to do X, Y, or Z instead. And so then you kind of have a little bit of a contingency plan that you can maybe shift to or alter something so that you're not so set in stone that you have to do it this way because this is the only thing we wrote in the grant. And if you have to go outside of what was in your grant parameter, most grantors, if you reach out to them and say, hey, this isn't working, and I have an idea to do this, they're usually pretty good about doing some sort of a grant amendment or a budget amendment or something like that to be able to, you know, kind of shift around a little bit because they want you to be successful. You're using their money, you know. So anything, if it's not working, switch it to be successful, and they'll support that. The other big thing they're going to ask you about is sustainability. So what are you going to do to support this after the grant funding runs out? Chief Cowden and I were just talking about that the other day. They're looking. Are you looking to get a safer grant, or you already did?
We applied.
Yeah. And so for how many years is it? 3 years. And so for 3 years, they're going to get how many more people? 8 more people. So what happens after 3 years with those 8 more people? So have you given yourself enough time and you've looked at your tax revenue trends where they're going to go up enough to be able to cover the cost of the salary wage benefits of those 8 when that grant funding runs out? Or are you going to have to go to the tax base, or are you going to have to try to figure out, you know, increasing your EMS transport, billing costs? You know, how are you going to be able to sustain that program or those people or that piece of apparatus or whatever it is after that money goes away? And so that's a big thing that now they're really wanting to know from you. And again, that goes back to having that organizational support of, no, we're committed to this, and so we're not going to let it fail. So a lot of grants I've written lately is like, no, we're putting this in the general budget for next year, you know, because we're committed to paying for it, and we're committing that the community wants it and that it's an identified need. But this grant funding sure would help out with that, where we could take that money then and push it back towards something else. So making sure that you have sustainable solutions for that once the funding is gone. Oh man, we're getting there. So you got it. Congratulations, you got the grant. So now what? Now comes the more pain in the ass part of it. Honestly, writing is the easy part. Once you get it though, and the management administration piece of it, that's actually the harder part of it, I think. So the big things, so you're going to get an award packet, you know, so that award packet is your Bible. Everything that you need to know, that you need to do for that grant is going to be in that award packet. It's going to go over, you know, what they prefer for procurement, whether you can use yours or theirs or how are you going to do that. It's going to cover your reporting time frame, what they want in the reports, auditing, you know, all these different things. And it's going to cover like, how do you get paid? Is this just a you pay for it and then we reimburse you? Or is this just a, hey, we're going to give you a check and you spend it however you want to do it? So this is really going to be your Bible. So I would say the biggest thing, take that, start a binder, and then, you know, create a tracking spreadsheet immediately, or have somebody create you a tracking spreadsheet immediately. So get that tracking spreadsheet going, have grant number, date, you know, and then have, you know, whatever it's purchases or whatever you're doing. Start that right away. Because if you get into the grant and you're going along and you're like, shit, I need to do a quarterly report, I haven't even started on a spreadsheet. And you're gonna go back and try to put all these expenses and try to remember all these travels and everything else. And it's a lose-lose situation, because then at the end of the year when that gets audited, or into the grant when that gets audited, you're like, oh, this doesn't match up. And then you're like, oh, I don't know why it doesn't match up. Well, it's because you waited till the last minute to get tracking on that stuff. Drafting a press release, media event, depending on the funder, you know, like I know like the Leary Firefighter Foundation, like they sent out a press release, you know, that they had put together for us, and we were able to send out to the newspapers. A lot of times we've got a community planning assistance for wildfire grant right now, same thing. We did a media day, you know, for the local community and things like that. So they want to they want to be able to get their name out there too and be associated with the community and what's going on in the community that they had funded and all these things. And then get to work. So what's the first thing you got to do once you get the grant? Anybody?
Start a spreadsheet.
Start a spreadsheet, yes, true. Then what?
Spend the money. Celebrate.
What do you have to do before you spend money though? A lot of times. Depending on how much
Get
it
your
costs.
authorization from your
And you get a budget
council
in
or
it.
whoever.
Start working on like RFPs, RFQs, try to look at procurement, seeing how you can do it. Is there sole source and all these things? It's a rabbit hole. So there's my rabbit hole. So you got it, now what? Purchasing. Whose fire department has a procurement policy? Who has a resolution with your board of trustees that says you follow your county's procurement policy or cities? Okay, so you gotta have something. If you're gonna be doing the grant business, you gotta have something. So I would say if you don't have a procurement policy, go online, find them. You can find some really good ones from other fire departments, or call me, ask me, I'll give you ours, it doesn't matter. That's really gonna line out, most of these grants will say you follow your local procurement policy. And that's gonna line out where, okay, if it's $50,000 or under, I gotta get 3 competitive bids. If it's $50,000 and over, I'm gonna have to put it out for a formal RFP. So that's really gonna kind of drive how you're gonna be purchasing or getting contracting your services and things like that. So there's also sole source procurement. Sole source procurement right now is actually a legitimate thing, because it used to be like it was kind of a bullshit way out where you could be like, oh yeah, well it's an emergency, I have to buy this now, I don't have time to go through an RFP. But with the supply shortages that are going on right now, like it's a legitimate thing. We've done one, we did one last year because we couldn't get, I can't remember what it was we couldn't get. But yeah, we did one last year. There's a lot of organizations doing it right now for apparatus, because you'll start shopping around, hey, I've got a demo engine that I'll sell you. It's like, okay, well I can get this one right now. And so like I can't get anything else for 4 years. So hey, because there's nothing else available, I can sole source this thing and get it bought right now. So there's some ways around that right now. And then there's also the pre-negotiated procurement. Has anybody bought off of like GSA or State Bid or Sourcewell, all these different ones? These are companies that go and pre-negotiate with these companies to get the best bids. They've already gone in and done that competitive process, and then they basically got a spec build for you that you can go off of. They're really good ways to do things, especially if you're ordering. We did one 2 years ago for ordering 2 new Type 5 cabin chassis. Just going through those programs, and makes it a lot easier to be able to do it that way. Because otherwise, if you put the RFP out, you got 30 days to sit on an RFP, then you got to go through them and have to have meetings on them, and you got all those different things. It's a lengthy process. So you bought your equipment, you're at the end of your first quarter, and you get your first performance report. Everybody loves the performance reports on every quarter. So it's pretty easy. This is just an example of one. What happened in that quarter? What were the impacts? What's the overall progress? Do you have an expected completion date? And what are the costs? So it's pretty self-explanatory, but I think the big thing on these ones is make sure that you've got what's your overall goal, or if you're using metrics and things like that, that you're saying, okay, quarter 1 we implemented X. Our goal is for this response time to be this. Hey, we're starting to track this, it's starting to come down. So just making sure that you're showing that things are getting better. Or if it's in the case of equipment, obviously it's like, hey, quarter 1, we put the RFP out for the equipment, or for the piece of equipment, or whatever we're doing. And then typically with the quarters, the reimbursements will usually go along with the quarters a lot of times, or they'll just let you do reimbursements when you want to. It seems to be easier for me, like whenever it's the time for the progress report, to do a reimbursement as well. So the big thing with the reimbursement is, if you're using contractors, you're buying something, make sure you've got a quote, your invoice, your proof of payments, and then a lot of times too, on those initial ones, you'll have to show them too how you did your procurement. So you have to give them, hey, here's our procurement policy, here's the RFP that we put out, here's the bids that we got back. They'll want to see all that stuff, so you want to make sure that you document and have all that stuff in the packet as well. And then supporting documentation, photos, time cards. If you're using guys' salaries, make sure you got your time cards there. If you're doing fuels mitigation project, make sure you got photos of the befores and afters and things like that. I talked about this a little bit earlier, budget amendments. Don't spend on something if it's not in the grant. Call them and say, hey, I'd like to spend on this. And they'll say, oh, okay, we'll have a budget amendment form for you to fill out. Do that before you're gonna spend on something that's not in the grant. Because that is a big, big no-no. Accruals, you guys know what accruals are. They're basically if you've got a grant on a performance period and it crosses over fiscal years for you, a reimbursement, they make you do an accrual form. So that's just something to keep, in your memory banks if you have to do one. It's kind of a pain in the ass. It's like, hey, we did this work in this fiscal year, but we're not asking for reimbursement until next fiscal year. So it just goes across. It's more of a financial tool. And then a fire department budgeting tip. So when I first came into Big Sky, we weren't doing this, and I was like, where's that grant money coming out of? And they're like, oh, it's coming out of operating expenses. And I'm like, well, that's not a very good way to track that. So when you go into your fire department budget, if you're doing grant work, make sure that you create a revenue and an expenditure account for federal grant revenue or private grant revenue or whatever it is that you have, and then have sub items underneath there for the actual grant themselves. So when you go at the end of the year to get your audit, or they're auditing you, the grant company is, you can just easily go into QuickBooks or whatever you're using, and you're able to dump those line items out, and you'll be able to see every expense and every revenue that's coming in between those line items. It makes your life a lot easier. And then at the very end, closeout. All right, all funds have been reimbursed. You got your final progress report complete. The funder has been satisfied. They've come and done a site visit. They're good with everything, or they come and take a look at your new engine and they're good with it. Project's complete. All the deliverables are submitted. You're able to deliver the metrics and said, hey, this made a measurable impact on our community, like we said when we were writing the grant for you. Records retention, that's a big thing too now. Your purge policy or your records retention policy within your organization may not be the same as what FEMA requires. What is FEMA, Joe? 7? Before so many years it's got to sit in your office, and then it can go to 7, and then it's got to go to storage.
Then the state says one thing, but
Yeah.
that's the other depending on.
And then it's got to go to a storage unit, but you have to document that it goes to the storage unit and which storage unit and where it's at, and then it sits in a storage unit for another, I don't know how many years. But they're super particular about it, which that's not probably the way that your regular, records retention or purge policy looks. So you got to make sure that you're matching what their records retention is for whoever's doing the grant funding. And then too, if you've got the funding to do so, do a third-party audit at the end of the year of whatever grant, especially if it's a big grant. Like, did anybody else get CARES funding? Some of the random CARES funding stuff that came out? No? Come on, Missoula. I know you guys. Come on, you got in there. we got new monitors. We got new LifePack 15s with CARES money. And
We got masks.
yeah. And then too, they reimbursed a lot of the salary, wages, and expenses too. And then, when you look at that, and we were like, okay, well, they're reimbursing salaries, for some of the time that we were spending doing, COVID response and all these things. But at the same time, we had guys out on wildland fires that were getting paid, and so we were like, we don't want to be double dipping and all these things. And so we were doing our due diligence to try to break that out and everything. And so we were at the end of the year, we're like, hey, let's do a third-party audit of just this CARES Act funding that we got, just to make sure that we didn't miss anything, we didn't do anything wrong with that. So yeah, third-party audit, if it's a big grant, there's a lot of stuff going on, like the Moores Creek project, I think got audited about 4 times after the fact, just to make sure that everything from the RFPs to, the payments to all those different things are all in cahoots with what you should have been doing. Cool. Well, we made it. When am I supposed to go to? 11:30?
Supposed to go to 11:21.
11:21?
Look at that.
Perfect. So yeah, does anybody have, any experience or anything else they kind of want to share with the group? Like I said, I'm not an expert by any means.
So yeah, in the fire department, treat yourself a nonprofit. So some of these grants are specific nonprofit grants. All those dollars add up, a lot less reporting, a little easier. So our fire department, we have a Firefighters Association, which is the 501c, and then obviously the fire department. So we get a lot of funding, I write a pile of them for a nonprofit, in return it just goes to the fire department anyway. It's another tactic to get more stuff.
Yeah, and our guys do the same thing. We got, because we have a lot of that too, with private donors and things like that. Obviously, in Big Sky, there's a lot of them that are like, hey, I want to make a donation. And it's like, well, we're not a 501c3. So, you know, we can't give you a taxable receipt for your donation. And so our guys through the union, they set up a 501c3 side hustle that they're able to take donations in. And they've used it for, you know, buying exercise equipment and things like that. So a couple of the websites real quick, you know, I got just a minute here to show you. The Montana Community Foundation, you guys familiar with that? They're awesome. Like if you go into Montana Community Foundation and you go into here, this is what I was talking about. There's so many little like endowment funds, scholarship funds, access funds, and all these things. And like they're very general, like with their funding. When you go to click on one of these different funds, so I'll just click on this one. A lot of them is like, it'll say like health and human services or like public safety, like that's one of their things. But you don't realize because it's not one of those ones that really hits the fire departments because it's not a fire specific grant like firehouse subs or this or that. But those ones will fund you. They funded that Harrison's command vehicle. I got them to fund our drone program that we put in place in Madison County in 2017. They were like, what? A drone program for public safety? They're like, yeah. And I mean, just they're willing to do it. So there's a lot of them out there that you can go and start looking at. I mean, this is where I was saying there's like 72 pages of like local endowment funds or local charitable trusts and all these different things. There are a lot of rich people in Montana that have trusts and funds and things like that, and so they live in your fire districts, and so they want to look at trying funding something locally. So yeah, you can get. We have one. So just a quick example, like there's the Spanish Peak Community Foundation, which is in Big Sky. You know, it's one like this, and we were like, hey, we need education equipment. They were like, cool, how much? And we were like, I don't know, 30 grand. They were like, okay, cool, here you go. You know, I mean, there's a lot of that out there. You just got to find them and know where to look. And then the other one is, so this is it's firegrantshelp.com. And this is one where you can search for grants. It's brought to you by Fire Rescue One. It was one of the magazines. I can't remember which one, but they'll typically post up ones that are currently accepting grants at this time, and then they'll have deadlines on those. And then you can kind of go and filter those down to at the top here to keywords. If you're just looking for apparatus, if you're just looking for mental health stuff or fuels mitigation or whatever. So that's a good place to look for those. You know, the states, when it comes to like fuels mitigation and things like that, the states do a really good job of pushing a lot of that information out to the fire departments and through DESs and things like that. So those ones are pretty good. So yeah, I mean, those are kind of the biggest tips and tricks I can give you guys, and you know, kind of just run you through the overview of how to do it. So I know a lot of you folks in the room have done some, so hopefully you guys learned maybe a new little nugget. For the folks that haven't done it before, hopefully you guys kind of have a broad overview and are either a little bit more willing to try to jump into the pool or I scared you off, I don't know, we'll see. But hopefully you guys are successful with that. I think, like I said, the biggest thing is just if you can show the need, you know, and you can, like a lot of times if you show them like, hey, I got a garbage budget, I would never be able to afford this thing unless you guys help us out. A lot of times, I mean, they'll just look at that and be like, okay, yeah, you guys really do need this, and they'll help you out. So, with that, you guys have any questions, comments for me? Like, this is the first time I put this on, so hopefully I did an okay job on it. Didn't overwhelm you. But I'm supposed to tell you too, the volunteer member meeting will be at lunch in the big meeting room, and they will be buying pizza from 12:30 to 1:30. So, all right, thanks.